Of course, Hurricane Helene was huge, and its effects were felt over a large swath of Florida. It brought storm surge to Florida's Gulf Coast from south of Tampa up to the Big Bend and continues to impact residents of states to our north who are dealing with devastating floods. Gina Jordan talked about the storm and other weather effects with Chief Meteorologist Tim Miller of the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network.
Helene was a different storm. I mean, this thing blew up in the Gulf of Mexico, racing off towards the northeast at 25 miles per hour, and the leading western edge of the cloud cover to the far east. This thing was about the size of Colorado or Wyoming. So imagine the state of Colorado racing towards you at 140 mile per hour winds. For a storm of that magnitude to be moving at 25 miles per hour, that's pedal to the metal. So you have this forward momentum and speed, and at that point, any type of wiggle can throw everything off kilter.
And it sounds like, based on the reasons you just gave, it really is important to stay focused on the cone instead of that little line in the middle.
What we have to remember is that line is the eye of the storm. Now, obviously, the closer you are to the eye, that's where the strongest winds are located, but the real weather surrounds the hurricane for several hundred miles out. And I have to say this, one of the things that we also focus on a lot is the category of the storm. Category 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I really think that we need to erase that type of thinking, because the only difference between a Category 4 hurricane and a Category 5 is 1 mile per hour wind speed. I've seen hurricanes that have been Cat 1s that have caused perhaps more damage than a Category 4 based on flooding and based on storm surge. I mean, so again, we have to erase the category idea out of our head. And again, you're exactly right with that cone. They call it the cone of uncertainty because it could be on either side of that center line is where that storm could actually land.
Yeah. So Helene was an absolute monster. We have seen flooding devastation that was previously unimaginable in western North Carolina and parts of Tennessee. And we know it was a Category 4 when it hit Taylor County. Do you know how long it stayed a hurricane as it moved up into Georgia?
I do know that it was at least a day that it was an actual hurricane through Georgia, which is unbelievable. Hurricane warnings in central Georgia. I've never heard of that. Atlanta.
Yeah, hurricane in Atlanta. I mean, crazy.
Right. Look how far Atlanta is. What I said all along, once this storm makes landfall, that the worst of the storm, we'd obviously get the worst of the storm surge and we'd have our own problems here. But this would be devastating for South Carolina and North Carolina. Normally, once a hurricane reaches landfall, we see it weaken. Number one, you have friction. Number two, it's lost its juice because it's no longer over the warm waters. But this thing kept barreling on through. It didn't care, and it just went right through into Georgia, up into the mountains of Georgia and Tennessee and North Carolina. It's just wild.
Yeah. And we've been warned for a few years now about the hot waters in the Gulf. Is that something that we can expect to see for a while?
Yeah, well, it's pretty typical. Plus, we also have to realize that the continental shelf is rather shallow. So we're talking about 400 feet. That means 400 feet. That seems like a lot. Well, not really, because once it drops off, then it goes into about 1,200, 1,800 feet. So the shallow water, obviously the shallower the water, the warmer that water is going to be. I mean, there were water temperatures off the coast of Tampa Bay that were at 90 degrees.
We've been told that the Gulf is just really hotter than ever and has been for a couple of years. Is that what you're seeing? And do you think this is a cyclical thing, or what do you think about that?
Well, I do think it is warmer than it has been, and will continue to be so. We often refer to climate change as being the reason for this, and that could very well be.
Yeah, well, it sounds like we need to focus on resiliency and dealing with rising waters along the coast, dealing with stronger storms, dealing with tornadoes where we're not used to having them.
Yeah, that's true. And plus, we have an increase of a 50% population around coastal areas around the United States. So we are somewhat inviting trouble, I think, sometimes, the longer we build along the coast, as much as we build. Florida, by the way, has some excellent building codes. Still, if we're going to build and have a population that continues to build along the coastal areas, we have to be prepared for the outcome of what could be a disaster if indeed a hurricane makes landfall in a populated area.
That was Florida Public Radio Chief Meteorologist Tim Miller speaking with Gina Jordan. It's going to be a long road to recovery for Pinellas County's beach communities after Hurricane Helene devastated that area. The storm didn't make landfall there, but it
Untitled
delivered
start
high
total.
winds.